The beam came in off-axis, smeared across the receiver dish like a thumb dragged through wet paint, and I knew before the decoder finished its first pass that it had not been meant for me. Nothing was ever meant for me. That was the whole point of the threshold watch. You sat at the end of a dead line, in a station that had no name on any current chart, and you logged the silence so that someone somewhere could one day confirm the silence had been logged. I had held the post for 11 years. In that time, the dish had caught exactly 4 things: a pulsar drifting through its window, 2 automated buoy pings from a survey lane 40 light-years coreward, and the slow cooked-off hiss of a star that had died before my grandfather was born. None of them had been a voice. This was a voice. I leaned into the console and let the decoder chew. The carrier was alien. Hegemony banding, the long triple pulse handshake their Navy stamped on everything it touched, and it was screaming, not loud. Alien distress never sounds loud. It sounds patient, the way a man drowning quietly because he doesn't want to embarrass anyone sounds patient. The packet header said the beam had been aimed at a Hegemony Fleet Anchorage 9 sectors spinward, a tight directional cast meant to thread between 2 gas giants and reach a naval relay that would scramble help. It had not threaded anything. It had clipped the upper atmosphere of a dwarf planet, refracted, lost most of its strength, and bled out across a wide cone of empty space. A cone that happened after God knew how many bounces, to include the one antenna nobody had thought to switch off in 90 centuries. I read the decode twice. The colony was called Vela Nu. 11,000 souls in pressure domes on a tide-locked rock, a mining concern the Hegemony had chartered, and then mostly forgotten, the kind of place that existed in the ledgers as a column of ore tonnage and nothing else. Their primary reactor had failed 9 days ago. Their backup was failing now. They had air for perhaps 100 hours and heat for less, and they had aimed everything they had at the Navy that was supposed to come. And the Navy had not answered, because the Navy had never heard them. The beam had gone wide on the first jump and stayed wide. By the time it reached anyone, it had reached the wrong species in the wrong era, through a door Earth had nailed shut before it ever left the system. I sat there with my hand on the cold edge of the console, and I did the arithmetic nobody had ever asked me to do. The threshold station was not a rescue post. It had never been a rescue post. It was a tripwire, a pre-diaspora listening array. Earth had flung out into the dark when humanity still thought it might need to hear an enemy coming, back when the species kept one foot in the cradle and the other in a fighting crouch. The threat it had been built to watch for had never materialized. Earth had grown up, spread out, signed its treaties, joined its councils, and somewhere along the way the threshold network had become a footnote, then a legend, then a line item that a committee 3 governments ago had decided was cheaper to leave running than to formally decommission. So it ran. So I sat in it. So the dish turned, slow and patient, listening for an enemy that was now 9,000 years overdue, 11,000 people, 100 hours. I keyed the long-range transmitter and got nothing but my own carrier coming back at me, flat and useless, of course. The station had a voice that could reach the modern galaxy, a thin one, a whisper down a corroded line. But a whisper would take days to crawl to the nearest crude hegemony post, and by then Vela Nu would be a frozen warehouse of bodies. I could shout into the dark and feel righteous about it for the 4 days it took the colony to die. That was when the second light came on. It was an old light. It was in fact the oldest light on the board, a square amber telltale set apart from the others in a brushed steel housing that predated the rest of the console by centuries, the kind of fixture that gets carried forward from refit to refit because no one is ever quite brave enough to be the one who removes it. In 11 years I had never seen it lit. I had assumed it was decorative, a dead bulb behind old glass, the way half the things in a place that old are just shapes that used to mean something. I had a laminated card in a drawer somewhere that listed what every telltale meant, printed in a font that had gone out of fashion before the colony I was now reading about had been founded. I found the card. My hands were not entirely steady. Patrol handshake, standing element query, it said. And under it, in smaller letters, the way you'd note something you never expected anyone to need. If lit, an asset of the standing patrol has acknowledged a tasking and is requesting routing. I read that 3 times too. There was no standing patrol. There had not been a standing patrol since before the words on that card were a living language. The threshold network had been built to listen, yes, but it had also been built to dispatch, to wake the long-range pickets. Earth had seeded along the same dark frontier, ships meant to run silent for years between contacts, hulls that crewed in shifts and slept the rest, the kind of vessel a young, frightened species builds when it cannot afford to be caught flat-footed and cannot afford to keep a fleet awake either. Those ships had names in the old records. They had crews. And then the records had stopped the way records do, and everyone reasonable had assumed the ships had stopped too, run out of fuel, run out of crew, run out of reasons. and gone cold in the deep where nobody would ever find them. But the light was lit. Something out there had heard the same bounced beam I had. Something had read the distress in it, parsed the colony's failing reactor in its 100 hours, and instead of logging it the way I had been trained to log everything, observe, record, do not engage, it had reached back down the dead line and asked the station, in a protocol older than any treaty in the galaxy, where it should go. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what I did in the next 10 seconds. Whether it was courage or only the absence of any better idea, I was a watchman. I had been hired to witness silence and keep my hands off the controls. The entire weight of 9,000 years of procedure said the correct action was to note the anomaly, flag it for a committee that would convene long after Vela knew was a cold rock, and touch nothing. I put my thumb on the routing key and I told it to go. The station did the rest. I want to be clear about that, because in the inquiry afterward there was a great deal of confusion about how much I had actually done, and the honest answer is, almost nothing. I did not command a ship. I did not know there was a ship to command. I authorized a routing handshake on a dead frequency, and the threshold station, ancient, built for exactly this and never once used for it, took the colony's coordinates and the colony's 100 hours and folded them into a packet and threw them out into the dark on a band that no living thing was supposed to still be speaking. The amber light blinked twice, slow, like an old man nodding to show he'd understood. Then it went dark. For a moment, I thought I had killed the only response there was ever going to be. I sat in the hum of the station with the alien voice still patiently screaming in my headset, and I thought, "You fool, you woke a ghost," and the ghost rolled over and went back to sleep. Then the dish moved. It moved on its own, which it was not supposed to do. The array tracked on a fixed sidereal program, and I had not touched the slew controls, and slewing that much mass took authorizations I did not possess. But it moved, grinding around on bearings that hadn't been greased since the last refit, hunting, and it locked onto a patch of empty sky out past the dwarf planet's terminator, and the receiver lit up like a city. Something was answering. Not the colony, not the hegemony navy. Something close, far closer than anything had any right to be. A hard, tight handshake coming back up the dead line in the same dead protocol, asset to station. The oldest conversation in human history resuming after 90 centuries as if it had paused for a coffee break. The decode crawled across my screen. I read it the way you read a name on a stone you weren't expecting to find. Element acknowledges. Relay hull designation Fortitude class. Crew complement. Standing watch. Inbound. Confirm. I confirmed. And then, because some part of me had to know, because I was a watchman, and a watchman's whole purpose is to know what he is looking at, I pulled the registry. The station's memory was vast and slow and mostly empty, a cathedral of nothing, but it held the old rolls, and the old rolls knew the Fortitude class, the way you know your own grandfather's face, from a photograph you've seen 1,000 times and never once met the man behind it. She had been built in the second wave, a long-endurance picket designed to run silent for a decade at a stretch, to sleep most of her crew in the cold and wake them in tens when the tripwire tripped. She had gone out past the threshold line on a patrol arc that was supposed to last 12 years and bring her home. The registry had a closing entry, and the closing entry was the kind of thing nobody writes unless they have given up. Overdue, presumed lost. Last contact, the entry said, was older than the alien empire whose distress call had just woken her. She had not been lost. She had simply never been told she could stop. I want to tell you the ship was beautiful when she finally showed on the long scan, but she wasn't. She was old in a way that hulls aren't allowed to get anymore. The Fortitude came up out of the dark slow and patient and wrong, and the first clean return I got off her made me lean back from the screen. She was scarred. Not battle-scared, there was no enemy out here to fight. There never had been, but time-scared, the way a coastline is scarred. Micrometeorite pitting across 9,000 years had sanded her bow down to a dull mat that scattered the starlight instead of reflecting it. Whole panels had discolored unevenly, some bleached pale, some gone the deep bruised purple of metal that has cooked slowly under hard radiation for longer than civilizations last. Her running lights were lit. That was the thing that stopped my breath. After all that time, all that dark, she came in with her running lights lit, a neat orderly string of amber points down a hull that should by every law of physics have been a cold derelict, and the lights said the only thing they had ever been built to say. Crude, under power on station. I hailed her. I didn't expect a voice. You don't expect a voice from a thing that old. I got one. Threshold, this is Fortitude Actual, a human voice. Flat, unhurried, scraped a little thin by whatever passed for a comm suite on a hull that had been running since before glass was invented twice over. We have the tasking. We have the colony's track. Confirm there are no friendly assets nearer than us. I sat with my mouth open for a second. Then I did my job. I checked the board. There was nothing nearer than the Fortitude. Nothing nearer than 4 days. And 4 days was a tomb. Fortitude threshold, I said. You're it. You're the only thing within reach. A pause. Not a hesitation, a pause. The kind a man takes when he's reading instruments and doesn't see the point in talking over them. Understood, the voice said. We'll take it. That was all. We'll take it. No questions about who I was, no demand for credentials I didn't have, no objection that the tasking had come through a routing handshake some watchman had thumbed on a hunch. The Fortitude had been given a colony and a clock, and the colony and the clock were all she seemed to feel she needed. She came about, I watched her do it on the scan, a slow, heavy turn, every degree of it costing her, and she lit her main drive for the first time in 9,000 years, and a flare of fusion light bloomed off her stern that washed the receiver white. She did not move like a modern ship. Modern ships dance. The Fortitude leaned into her acceleration, the way a freight train leans into a grade, all that ancient mass gathering itself. And the math on my console said she would make Vela Nu's orbit in 81 hours. The colony had 100. It was going to be close. It was going to be exactly as close as the worst kind of close. The kind where you don't find out until the end. I should have stopped there. My post was a tripwire. The tripwire had tripped. The asset was inbound. My job was done, and the manual was very clear that done meant hands off. But I couldn't stop. 11 years of silence, and now there was a ship and a colony and a clock, and I was the only living thing positioned to watch all three at once. I patched the colony's distress beam through to the Fortitude's track, and I sat my watch the way no threshold attendant had ever sat one. I became, without ever being asked, the line between a dying colony and a ship that had forgotten how to die. The colony did not know she was coming. That was the part that gnawed at me through the first long hours. Vela Nu was still screaming its patient scream 9 sectors spinward, still aiming its failing strength at a navy that had never heard it, and the help that was actually coming for it was a thing they had never called, could not have called, did not know existed. I tried to reach them. I had the whisper line, the thin modern voice the station could barely afford, and I aimed it down the lanes toward Vela Nu, and I sent the only message that mattered: help, inbound, hold, 80 hours, hold. It would crawl. Light is light, and the lanes are long, and my whisper would reach them late and weak. But it would reach them, and I sent it, and then I sent it again, and I kept sending it, a watchman shouting hold into a dark that had never once answered him until tonight. The Fortitude ran silent after that first exchange. I understood why eventually. She was rationing. Whatever was keeping her crew alive, and there was a crew, the handshake had said standing watch, and standing watch meant living men and women asleep in the cold who had been born, some of them, on a ship that had never made port. Whatever was keeping them alive had been keeping them alive for 90 centuries. And you do not survive 90 centuries by chattering. She burned her drive and she held her tongue and she ate the distance 1 hour at a time. At the 30-hour mark, she broke silence to ask me one question. Threshold, Fortitude Actual. The tasking packet listed the senders as Hegemony Charter. Confirmed species, confirmed the call was directed at us. It was such a strange question that I read it twice. Confirmed the call was directed at us, as if it mattered, as if a ship 9,000 years out, burning the last of herself toward a rock full of strangers, needed to know whether the strangers had meant to ask. Fortitude Threshold, I said. Species confirmed hegemony, and negative. The call was not directed at you. I hesitated because the truth of it was only now landing on me, the full crooked shape of it. The call wasn't directed at anyone human. They beamed it at their own navy. It bounced. It bounced all the way to me, and I'm not supposed to exist either. You're answering a call that was never sent to you. They don't know you. They've never heard of you. They've never heard of Earth at all. The charter that founded that colony is younger than your last shore leave. The pause this time was longer. Long enough that I thought the old comms had finally given out. Then the flat, scraped voice came back, and there was nothing in it I could read. No surprise, no grievance, no grand human sentiment for the inquiry to quote later. Understood, Fortitude Actual said. Doesn't change the track. And that was all. Doesn't change the track. The oldest crew in the galaxy, woken from a watch that had outlived its own empire, told plainly that the people they were dying to reach had never called them and would not know their names. And the answer was a man checking his instruments and not seeing the relevance of it. She did not slow. She did not turn. The fusion flare held steady off her stern, and the 81 hours became 79, became 76. The colony's clock and the colony's hull and the colony's 11,000 strangers, all converging on a single point in the dark where an old ship and a new disaster were going to meet whether anyone had meant them to or not. I sat my watch. I sent my whisper. Hold, help inbound. And 9 sectors away on a tide-locked rock the galaxy had forgotten, the people of Vela Nu kept screaming at a navy that would never come, never once imagining that something far older and far stranger had already heard them and was already on its way. There is a recording I should not have of the first minutes after the Fortitude woke, and I have listened to it more times than I will admit. The threshold station logged everything that came down the dead line, and in the first hour after I thumbed the routing key, it logged the old ship's internal chatter, leaked across the open handshake before her crew thought to close the channel, the private sound of a warship coming back to life after 90 centuries. It is mostly numbers. It is mostly the flat-clipped traffic of people checking systems they have not had reason to push in a very long time. But underneath the numbers you can hear it. If you listen the way a watchman learns to listen, you can hear a thing that has been asleep for 9,000 years deciding whether it can still do the only thing it was ever built to do. Coil 1, nominal. Coil 2, hold. Coil 2, reading soft. The first words I ever heard from the Fortitude that were not aimed at me, a voice reading a fault that would, 2 days later, cost a colony 3 hours and a 4-year-old child her life. And not knowing it yet, just noting it, the way you note a thing you'll have to watch. Reactor at standby, bringing it up slow. It hasn't run at load since. And there the voice stopped, because the answer to since when was a number too large to be useful, and a man checking a reactor does not have time for numbers that large. Then the part I cannot stop hearing. A second voice, fainter, scraped even thinner than the first, asking a question into the cold of a ship that had not had a reason to answer 1 in 90 centuries. Is it real? Tell me it's real. Tell me we finally got a real one. And the first voice, Fortitude Actual, though I did not know his billet yet, answering, it's real. Colony 11,000, reactor dead, 100-hour budget. It's the real thing. Wake the second watch. And then quieter almost to himself, a thing the inquiry never heard because I never gave them this recording. After all this time. After all this damn time. All right, let's go to work. You have to understand what waking the second watch meant. The Fortitude ran on 40 souls. The rest slept the cold sleep in their berths, down in the dark, on a closed loop of air and power rationed across geological time. Waking more of them cost margin, cost air, cost heat, cost some fraction of the centuries the ship had left in her. For 9,000 years, no call had ever been worth that cost. No call had ever come at all. And now Fortitude Actual, 4 billets deep into a watch handed down like a lamp through a corridor with no end, was spending margin he could never get back to wake sleepers who had earned their rest, because a colony he had never heard of, that had never heard of him, had aimed a cry at the wrong door, and he had caught it. He woke them. I have that on the recording too, the sound of the cold berths cycling, a long mechanical sigh deck by deck as the old ship spent herself to put more hands on the watch. And one by one the sleepers came up, and the chatter on the leaked channel thickened, voices joining it that had been silent for centuries. Men and women surfacing out of the cold sleep into a moment they had been built for and had stopped, most of them, ever expecting to see. I heard one of them, a woman's voice, the oldest sounding thing on the recording, and I have wondered ever since if it was the one Tel Voss later watched carry his colony's children up through the collar in her own arms. I heard her come up out of the berth and say, before anything else, before any system check, 3 words into the cold. Who needs us? Not where am I? Not how long was I down? Not is the ship dying? The first words out of a woman waking from 9,000 years of cold sleep were a watchkeeper's words, the only question the watch had ever really been about. Who needs us? And someone told her a colony 11,000, the wrong door, the bounce beam, and the recording catches her exhaling, a long slow breath and saying only good. Then let's not keep them waiting. That is the thing I most wish the inquiry could have heard, in all its weeks of trying to find a category for what the Fortitude was. They kept looking for intent, for claim, for the reason a ship would spend itself on a colony that never called. They read the 4-line hail 40 times looking for it. But the reason was never in the hail. The reason was in 3 words spoken by a woman waking from the cold into a ship she had given her life to, before she even knew if that ship would survive the burn. Who needs us? The whole of it was in that. A frightened young species had built a thing to listen for an enemy, and crewed it with people who, woken after 90 centuries, asked first, and only who needed them. And somewhere in all that listening the watch had stopped being about the enemy at all. It had become about the listening itself. About being the ship that was close enough, when the call finally came, no matter whose name was or wasn't on it. I closed the channel after that. I shouldn't have had it open at all. It was their private moment. The sound of a crew coming back to itself, and a watchman has no business since another crew's waking. But I kept the recording. I have never told the inquiry it exists. Some things are not evidence. Some things are just the truth, and the truth does not always belong in a file. The Fortitude finished waking her second watch, brought her reactor up to load for the first time in 9,000 years, and lit her drive toward a colony that did not know she was coming. And on the leaked channel, in the last seconds before I closed it for good, I heard Fortitude Actual give the order that the whole long night had been waiting for. The order a ship like that is built to give and almost never gets to. The words a young and frightened Earth had put in her keeping 9,000 years before and then forgotten she still knew how to say. All hands, the old voice said. We have a call. Make for the colony best speed. We're going to go bring those people home. The colony answered my whisper at the 50-hour mark, and the voice that came back was the most exhausted thing I have ever heard. I had given up expecting it. The lanes were long. My transmitter was a corroded ghost of a thing, and I had been sending Hold into the dark for 2 days with no more hope of reply than a man dropping coins down a well to hear them land. But the well answered. A carrier rose up out of the static, weak and trembling, and a translator package fitted itself over it. And a hegemony voice spoke into my station for the first time in its history. This is Velanu Actual. Identify, please. We are receiving a signal we cannot place. A breath ragged through the translator. We have been receiving the word hold for some hours. We do not understand it. Who is holding? Who is sending, please? We have very little time, and we cannot afford to hope at the wrong thing. I have thought about that line more than any other from that whole long night. We cannot afford to hope at the wrong thing. There is a kind of dignity in despair that has done its arithmetic, and the man on the other end of that line had done his. He was not panicking. He was not begging. He was simply asking with the last of his strength whether the strange word crawling into his dying colony was a rope or only a trick of the light, because he could not afford to spend what little he had left reaching for a rope that wasn't there. His name, I would learn, was Administrator Tel Voss. He was not a soldier or a navigator. He was the man the colony had elected to run its ledgers and its water rations and its disputes over dome space, and when the reactor died he had become, by the brutal simple logic of a place too small for a chain of command, the man who decided who got the dwindling air and who said the words over the dead. He had aimed the colony's distress beam at the hegemony navy himself, with his own hands 9 days ago. He had aimed it carefully. He had checked the coordinates 3 times because his people's lives were in them. And it had gone wide on the first jump, and he did not know it. And he had spent 9 days believing help was simply slow. Velanu, I said, and I picked my words the way you pick your steps on ice. My name doesn't matter, and you wouldn't recognize my people. I'm a long way away, at a station you've never heard of. Your distress beam, it didn't reach your navy. It went wide on the first jump, it bounced. It reached me instead by accident, and it reached someone else by accident, and that someone is coming. Inbound, on your colony now. 26 hours out. I need you to hold for 26 hours. The silence that came back was not the silence of a deadline. It was the silence of a man trying to fit a shape into his head that would not fit. It did not reach the navy, Tel Voss said at last slowly, as if laying the words out on a table to look at them. 9 days. I aimed it myself. I checked it 3 times. Another silence. Who is coming? Then, if not the Navy. Who hears a call that was not sent to them and comes anyway? I looked out at the scan, where the Fortitude was a single hard point of fusion light grinding across the dark, 9,000 years old and 26 hours away, and I did not have a good answer. So I gave him the true one. Something old, I said. Something that was never supposed to still be out here. It heard your reactor failing in the carrier wave. It didn't ask whether the call was for it. It just turned and started burning. That's all I can tell you. Hold, he held. I will not pretend the next day was clean. It was not. At the 40-hour mark, Velanu lost its last backup and the heat began to go, and Tel Voss came back on the line with the numbers stripped of everything but the truth. They had moved everyone into 3 domes and sealed the rest. They were burning furniture and personal effects in improvised hearths to buy degrees. 2 of the elderly had died in the cold already, and a child was failing. And the administrator told me these things in the same flat ledger voice he must have used for the ore tonnage, because it was the only voice he had left that wouldn't break. He told me because I had become, across the lanes, the only other soul who knew. The Navy didn't know. The hegemony didn't know. 11,000 people were freezing on a rock, and the entire weight of their own empire was looking the wrong way. And the only 2 beings in the galaxy who knew their names were a watchman at a dead station and a ghost ship that hadn't made port since before the Empire was born. Tell me about the ship, Tel Voss said, in the worst of the cold, when I think he needed something to hold that wasn't a number. The old thing that is coming. Tell me what it is, so I told him. I told him about Earth, which he had never heard of, a small wet world a long way away that had once been young and frightened and had thrown sentinels out into the dark to listen for an enemy that never came. I told him about the threshold line, and the pickets that ran silent for years, and the crews that slept in the cold and woke in tens, and the Fortitude going out on a patrol arc that was supposed to last 12 years and bring her home. I told him the patrol had never ended, that somewhere along the line the orders to come home had gotten lost, or the ship that carried them had gone cold, or the home that issued them had simply forgotten she was out there, and that the Fortitude had not stopped because no one had ever told her she could, and a ship like that does not stop on its own. She's been on station for 9,000 years, I said, waiting for a call. Yours is the first one she's ever gotten. The translator carried his answer through very quietly. We did not call her. No, I said. You didn't. We did not even know to call her. We did not know she existed. We aimed our prayer at our own, and our own did not hear. And a stranger older than our prayers heard it instead and is spending the last of itself to reach us. His voice did something then that the translator could not quite render. A catch, a thing underneath the words. What do we owe a debt like that to? How does a colony pay a ship that has been dead longer than we have been alive? You don't, I said. You just hold. The Fortitude broke her silence one more time before the end. She came on the line at the 18-hour mark, and Fortitude Actual asked me, in that flat, scraped voice, to confirm the colony's dome layout and atmosphere composition and the size of their largest pressure lock. I gave him the numbers Tel Voss had given me. There was a pause while the old ship did its arithmetic, the arithmetic of how you take 11,000 freezing strangers off a dying rock with the hull built 9,000 years ago for an entirely different war. It's tight, Fortitude Actual said. We weren't built to carry passengers. We'll make room. How, I asked. I shouldn't have. It wasn't my place. But I asked. We'll vent the cold berths, the voice said. And for the first time there was something underneath it, something I have never been able to name. We've got bunks for a standing watch and most of the watch is still asleep. We won't be waking them. They've earned the rest. We'll give their air to the colony. I didn't understand at first. Then I did. The Fortitude's crew had survived 9,000 years by sleeping the cold sleep, waking in tens to stand the watch, most of them down at any given moment in berths that ran on a closed loop of air and power that had been carefully, brutally rationed across geological time. To make room for 11,000 aliens who had never called them, they were going to give up the berths. They were going to spend the margin that had kept them alive since before history. They were going to wake fewer of their own, ever again, so that strangers could breathe. Confirm you understand the colony does not know you, I said one last time, because the inquiry would ask me whether I had said it, and I needed to be able to say I had. Confirm you understand they never sent for you. Confirmed, Fortitude Actual said. Doesn't change the track. We're 16 hours out. Tell them to gather at the locks, I told them. And on a tide-locked rock 9 sectors from the nearest soul who knew their names, 11,000 people who had aimed their last hope at the wrong door began, on the word of a watchman they would never meet, to gather at the locks and wait for a ship that did not exist. The Fortitude broke silence again at the 45-hour mark, and this time she did not ask me a question, she told me something. Threshold, Fortitude Actual. Be advised we've lost the number 2 drive coil. We're down to a single coil for the deceleration burn. Recomputing arrival. A pause while old machines did old arithmetic. New arrival. Vela new orbit, 84 hours from dispatch. We've lost 3. I felt it land in my stomach, 3 hours. The colony's clock did not have 3 hours to give away. I had been telling Tel Voss 81, and the number had felt like a thin enough margin. Already, a coin balanced on its edge, and the old ship had just shaved 3 hours off it because a part 9,000 years past its service life had finally let go. Fortitude threshold, I said. The colony's heat budget, 3 hours is a lot of bodies. Can you push it back? A silence that I had learned by then to read. It was the silence of a man looking at numbers that do not bend. We can't push the burn without the second coil, Fortitude Actual said. We can run the first one past its rating. We'll do that. But there's a way to make up the 3 hours, and you're not going to like it. And I need you to relay it to the colony so they understand what's about to happen. Another pause. We can't slow all the way down before we reach them. Not on one coil. We can either arrive on time and arrive too fast to make orbit, or arrive in orbit and arrive 3 hours late. So we're going to do neither. We're going to come in hot, break hard in atmosphere, and take them off from a low pass instead of a parked orbit. It's rougher. It puts more strain on the hull than the hull has any business taking. But it lands us over the domes inside the budget. I did not understand all of it, but I understood enough. The old ship was going to abuse herself even harder than she already had. Drag a 9,000-year-old hull through the upper atmosphere of a planet to bleed off speed she couldn't bleed off any other way, because the alternative was to arrive 3 hours after the people she was coming for had frozen. Will the hull take it, I asked. The hull will take it, Fortitude Actual said, for exactly long enough. I relayed it to Tel Voss the way it had been given to me, because the old ship had asked me to, and because the man had a right to know what was coming over his sky. He took it the way he took everything by then, in the ledger voice, but I heard the math running underneath it. It will break in our atmosphere, he repeated. It will scorch itself to reach us on time. Threshold. Tell it. Tell it we would rather it arrived whole and 3 hours late and took whoever was left, than that it tore itself apart to save the 3 hours. Tell it we have made our peace with our arithmetic. We will not have it die for our last 3 hours. I relayed that too. There was a long quiet on the Fortitude's channel, and then the flat voice came back, and for the second time there was something underneath it I could not name. Tell the administrator we appreciate the sentiment, Fortitude Actual said. Tell him we've been making our peace with our own arithmetic for 9,000 years, and we're better at it than he is. We're coming in hot. Have his people braced and clear of the South Domes. We'll be loud, I told him. And 9 sectors away, in 2 freezing domes, Teal Voss moved his people clear of the south wall and braced them for a noise they could not imagine and did not argue again, because there are gifts you cannot refuse without insulting the giver. While the old ship burned toward them, I learned, in pieces, what the Fortitude actually was. Not the registry hull I had pulled on that first night, but the living thing of it, the crew. Fortitude Actual talked over those last hours more than I think he had talked in centuries, and I have come to believe it was because he had not had anyone new to talk to in longer than I could hold in my head, and a watchman at a dead station was the closest thing to a stranger he had met since, before my species learned to write. There were 40 of them awake. 40, out of a complement the registry had listed in the thousands. The rest were down in the cold berths, had been down for so long that the line between sleep and something else had blurred, and the waking 40 stood the watch in rotations measured not in hours but in years. They woke their reliefs from the berths when their own time came to sleep, and the relief stood the watch and woke the next, and so it had gone, an unbroken chain of 40 waking souls handing the ship down through 90 centuries like a lamp passed hand to hand down a corridor with no end. Fortitude Actual was the 4th of his name to hold the post, not a bloodline, he was careful to say, a billet. The title passed to whoever stood the longest watch and proved he could be trusted with the others' sleep. The first Fortitude Actual had been the captain who took her out on the 12-year patrol. He was 9,000 years dead in a berth 2 decks down, and they had never woken him, because there had never been a call worth the cost of waking him, until now. He'd have liked this one, Fortitude Actual said of the captain 9,000 years dead, a colony that needed taking off a rock. That's the job. That was always the job. We just had to wait a very long time for someone to need it. You waited 9,000 years for a wrong number, I said. I don't know why I said it. It came out before I could stop it. The old voice was quiet for a moment. Son, Fortitude Actual said, and I was not a young man, but to him I suppose everything was young. There's no such thing as a wrong number on a distress band. There's only a call, and whether you're close enough to answer it. We were close enough. That's the whole of it. That's the only part that was ever ours to decide. I have carried that sentence for a long time. There's only a call, and whether you're close enough to answer it. A young and frightened species had built that ship to listen for an enemy, and the enemy had never come. And somewhere in 9,000 years of listening, the crew had quietly decided that the listening itself was the point. That a thing built to hear, the dark and crewed by people willing to spend themselves on what they heard, did not much care whether the call in the dark had its name on it. The colony did not have a name for the Fortitude. They had no word in their language for what she was. But Teal Voss told me that in the last hours, in the 2 freezing domes, his people had started calling her something anyway, a word that came up out of their own old stories and fitted itself over the strange old ship the way the translator had fitted itself over his voice. He told me the word, but the translator would not carry it cleanly, and what came through, the nearest thing my own language could hold, was this. The one that was already coming. That was what they called her, at the end, the 11,000 who had aimed their last hope at the wrong door. Not the rescuer, not the savior. The one that was already coming before they called, before they knew to call, before their species had a charter or their council had a record. The one that had been out there in the dark the whole time, lights lit, running silent, waiting for a reason. She is 40 hours out, Teal Voss said. We are holding. Tell her we know now what she is. Tell her we are not afraid of the noise. Not everyone on Villeneuve wanted to be rescued by a ghost. I learned this the hard way. At the 36-hour mark, when Teal Voss came on the line with a new strain in his voice that had nothing to do with the cold. There was a man on the colony council named Davrin Sewell. The administrator told me, the colony's senior engineer, the one who had nursed the dying reactor for 9 days before it finally beat him, and the kind of man who trusts what he can put his hands on and nothing else. Davrin Sewell did not believe in the Fortitude. Not the way you disbelieve a lie, the way you refuse a hallucination. Because to believe it and be wrong is worse than to never have hoped at all. He says it cannot be real, Teal Voss told me. He says a hull cannot run for 9,000 years. He says no crew survives that long. He says the signal is a ghost in a dead line and echo, a thing my grief has built because I cannot bear the silence. And threshold, half the colony believes him. Half of them have stopped gathering at the locks. They have gone back into the deep domes to die where it is at least their own people lying beside them, rather than walk out onto the apron and freeze waiting on a ship that this engineer, this good and careful man, swears does not exist. I sat with that. It was I realized the cruelest possible thing, that the help was real, was burning toward them at the cost of itself, and that the very impossibility of it was killing the colony as surely as the cold. Voss had asked his people to believe in something his own records could not hold, on the word of a stranger at a station nobody had heard of, relaying a voice nobody could place. Davrin Sewell was not a fool. Davrin Sewell was being entirely reasonable. That was the horror of it. Everything reasonable, said the Fortitude, was a ghost, and reasonable was going to kill half the colony. Put him on, I said. He will not speak to you. He says you are part of the ghost. Then relay this to him exactly, I said. I thought for a moment about how to convince a careful man of a thing that no careful man should believe. And then I understood that I could not, and that I should not try, and that the only honest thing I had was the truth. Tell Davrin Sewell, I said, that he is right. Tell him a hull should not run for 9,000 years. Tell him no crew should survive that long. Tell him everything he believes about ships and crews and time is correct, and that by every law he knows, the thing coming toward his colony should not exist. And then tell him that it is coming anyway, and that it lost a drive coil 4 hours ago, and is going to scorch itself through his atmosphere to reach his people on time, and that none of that requires his belief. The ship does not need him to believe in it. It needs him to be standing at the lock when it arrives. Tell him a careful man should at least be standing where the impossible thing can reach him, in case the impossible thing turns out to be real. Because if he is wrong, he loses nothing but a few cold hours on the apron. And if he is right, he has lost nothing at all. But if he stays in the deep dome and the ship is real, he has talked half his colony into freezing for the sake of being correct. Voss relayed it. I do not know exactly what Davrin Sewell said back, because the administrator did not repeat it, but an hour later he came on the line and his voice had changed. He is at the lock, Voss said. He came out onto the apron and he is standing at the south lock with his arms folded and his back to the others, watching the sky, telling everyone within earshot that he is only there to prove the ship is not coming. He has brought his family with him. A pause. He has brought his family threshold. A man does not bring his children to stand watch over a thing he truly believes is a ghost. He came out to be proven wrong. I think he wanted very badly to be proven wrong. And so the colony gathered all of it. The believers and the careful man and the careful man's children, 11,000 of them stacked into shelters, meant for a fraction of that, breathing each other's warmth, watching a sky that had given them nothing for 9 days, on the word of an administrator and a watchman, and a voice from a station that no chart admitted. The cold did not wait for the ship. That was the other thing those hours taught me, that a rescue is not a single moment, but a race against 100 small failures, and that some of the failures win even when the rescue does. At the 30-hour mark, the failing child failed. Voss told me in the ledger voice, flat, the way he told me the ore tonnage, and then his voice broke clean in half on the next word, and he had to stop and breathe before he could go on. The child's name was Imni. She was 4. The cold had been too much for her small body, and the ship had been 3 hours too far away, and there is no version of the arithmetic in which a single drive coil failing 9,000 years past its rating did not cost a 4-year-old life. I did not say anything wise to tell Voss. There was nothing wise to say. I sat at my dead station and I listened to a man on the far side of 9 sectors grieve a child I would never see, and I logged it because logging was the only thing the post had ever taught me how to do. When the Fortitude broke silence an hour later to confirm her breaking profile, I told Fortitude Actual about the child. I do not know why. He could do nothing about it. The child was beyond any ship. But I told him, and the old voice was quiet for a long moment, and then it said the thing I have never forgotten. We'll take her too, Fortitude Actual said. When we lift the colony, we'll take her with the others. A ship doesn't leave anyone behind because it arrived too late for them. That's not how the watch works. We came for all of them. We'll carry all of them. The ones we save and the ones we were too slow for, they all go home. That is what the old ship meant. I understood then. By the count, it would later report. 11,009 recovered. 2 deceased recovered for return. It was not 2. By the time the Fortitude came over the dome line, it was 3, and then it was more, because the cold kept winning small even as the ship was winning large, and the old crew gathered up every one of them, the saved and the lost alike, and carried them all up out of the gravity well together. A ship built by a frightened species to listen for an enemy had decided, somewhere in 9,000 years of listening, that the measure of a watch was not only who you reached in time, It was whether you came back for everyone, including the ones the dark had already taken. Tell the administrator, Fortitude Actual said. Tell him about the child. Tell him she goes home with the rest. Tell him we don't keep two lists, I told him. Tel Voss did not answer for a long time. When he did, it was only to say that he had relayed it to the colony and that the careful man, Davrin Sewell, standing at the south lock with his arms folded and his children behind him, had heard it and had finally, after 36 hours of refusing, turned his face up to the empty sky and begun to wait in earnest. He believes now, Tel Voss said, not because it makes sense. It still does not make sense. He believes because a ghost does not come back for the dead. Only something real does that. Only something that thinks the dead are worth the trip. The administrator's voice was very quiet. We are all at the lock's threshold. All of us. Tell the one that is already coming that we are ready for the noise. The Hegemony Navy heard Villeneuve at the 28-hour mark, 9 days too late and from the wrong direction, and only because of me. I had kept the colony's beam patched through my station the whole time, and somewhere in those long hours it had occurred to me that the Navy that should have answered was still out there, still deaf, still anchored at the post the colony had aimed for, and that the only reason they had not come was that no one had ever told them in a voice they could hear. So I had taken the colony's distress packet, the one that had bounced wide and reached me, and I had cleaned it and aimed my thin whisper line down the lanes toward that naval anchorage, the right anchorage, the one Tel Voss had meant to reach 9 days ago. It took my whisper a long time to crawl there, but it crawled, and at the 28-hour mark, a Hegemony naval relay finally registered a distress call from a charter colony it had on its rolls, and the Navy, for the first time, learned that Villeneuve was dying. I know what happened next because the naval officer who handled it filed a report, and the report became part of the inquiry, and Tel Voss sent me the relevant page. The officer's name was Subcommander Inelvash, and her report is a small masterpiece of procedural bewilderment. She logged receipt of the colony's distress call. She logged that the call was 9 days old. She logged that she immediately ordered the nearest naval element to make for Villeneuve at best speed, and then she logged the line that the inquiry would chew on for weeks. The line that she clearly did not know what to do with, even as she wrote it. Nearest naval element estimated arrival, 91 hours. Be advised an unregistered vessel of unknown origin is already inbound to the colony. Estimated arrival 14 hours, having apparently received and acted upon the distress call before this command did. Request guidance. I do not know what this vessel is. I do not know how it heard a call we did not. 14 hours. The Navy was 91 out, and the ghost was 14. And the Navy's own officer sat at her post and wrote into the official record that she did not know what was about to save her colony or how it had known to come when her own fleet, the fleet the colony had actually called, was still the better part of 4 days away. I relayed Subcommander Vash's estimate to the Fortitude because it seemed right that the old ship should know the cavalry was, at long last, technically on its way. Navy's coming, I told Fortitude Actual. 91 hours out, they finally heard. The colony's own people are inbound. Good, the old voice said, without a flicker. They'll want their own. We'll set the colony down where the Navy can take them and we'll stand off. We're not here to take anything from anyone. We're here to make sure there's a colony left for the Navy to find. A pause. Tell their officer what's the name. Vash. Subcommander Inel Vash. Tell Subcommander Vash there's no need to request guidance about us. We're not a threat and we're not a claim. We caught a call and we answered it. When the dust settles, she can have her colony back with our compliments. We'll be gone before her fleet arrives. Another pause, and then the thing that I think the inquiry never quite forgave the old ship for, because it left nothing to investigate. We don't need anyone to know we were here. The colony lives either way. That's the only line in the log that matters. I relayed it. I do not think Subcommander Vash believed it. A vessel that wanted nothing, claimed nothing, intended to vanish before the rightful Navy arrived, was as far outside her categories as it was outside her councils. But she logged it, and the logging of it is part of why I'm able to tell you any of this at all. In the last hours before the burn, with the colony gathered at the locks and the Navy 4 days out and the old ship coming in hot on a single coil, Fortitude Actual asked me to do one last thing, and it was the strangest request of the whole night. When this is over, he said, the colony's going to want to thank somebody. They always do. And we're going to be gone, and you're going to be the only one left on a channel they can reach. So they're going to thank you. A pause. Don't let them. Not you, not us. Tell them the thanks goes the other way. I don't follow, I said. They held Fortitude Actual said. 9 days of cold, a reactor dead under their feet, half the colony told by a good engineer that the help was a ghost, a child lost to the dark, and they held. They gathered at the locks on the word of a voice they couldn't place, relayed by a station that doesn't exist, about a ship that shouldn't. That's the hard part. That's the part that takes courage. Any fool with a hull can come when called. Holding when you've got no reason left to hope, that's the watch. They stood a harder watch than we did. The old voice was quiet a moment. So when they thank you, tell them no. Tell them we were just close enough. Tell them they're the ones who held the line. We only came down it. I have thought about that more than almost anything else from that night. More even than the running lights coming up over the dome line. More than the two words the ship said when she rose into the daylight. A crew that had stood a watch for 9,000 years, woken at last by a call meant for someone else, spending the final margin of their lives to scorch a hull through an alien sky. And what they wanted, at the end, was for the credit to go to the colony that had merely refused to give up. They did not want to be heroes. They had never wanted to be heroes. They wanted to be what they were built to be, which was a thing that listens to the dark and goes when the dark calls, and they wanted the people they came for to understand that the courage in it had been theirs all along. So when the burn came, when the old ship lit her single coil past its rating and dropped toward the planet trailing fire, I did the only thing a watchman at the end of a deadline could do. I patched it all together, the colony's open channel, the Navy's distant track, the Fortitude's hot inbound vector, and I held them all on one board, the dying and the saved and the late-coming cavalry and the ghosts that had heard them all first, and I bore witness. That was the post. It had always been the post. To sit at the end of the silence and log what came down the line. And what came down the line in the last hour before the noise was Tail Voss's voice one more time, steadier now, the way a man's voice steadies when the waiting is nearly done. "We can see her, threshold," he said. "There is a light on the horizon, and it is getting larger, and it is trailing fire." The careful man, Davrin Sewell, is standing very still. He is holding his children's hands. He has stopped saying, "It is not coming." A breath, "Tell me one more time. Tell me what it is, so that I can tell my people while we watch it come down." And I told him one more time what it was. A sentinel of a frightened young species, thrown out into the dark 9,000 years ago to listen for an enemy that never came and never told it could stop and never once stopping. A crew of 40 awake and thousands asleep, handing the watch down the centuries like a lamp in a corridor with no end. A ship that had waited longer than his empire had existed for a single call worth answering, and had taken his colony's bounced and broken cry, meant for a navy that could not hear it, and turned, without asking whether the call was hers, toward a rock full of strangers she would spend the last of herself to reach. "She is the one that was already coming," Tel Voss said softly, repeating his people's word for her. "She was already coming the whole time, before we called, before we knew. She was already coming," I agreed. "Brace your people. Here comes the noise." The last 16 hours were the worst, because there was nothing left to do but watch the 2 points converge and pray they met before the cold won. I had no instruments at Villeneuve. I could not see the domes or the locks or the people stacked in their 3 sealed shelters, burning the last of their furniture. All I had was Tel Voss's voice across the lanes, thinner every hour, and the hard fusion point of the Fortitude grinding down the dark on my scan, and the arithmetic between them that I checked and rechecked until the numbers stopped meaning anything. 81 hours had become 16, had become 8. The colony's 100-hour clock had become a number Tel Voss would no longer say out loud, which was how I knew it had gotten small. At the 8-hour mark, a third dome lost pressure integrity. Tel Voss didn't tell me how. He just told me they had moved everyone into 2 domes now, and that the 2 domes were colder for being fuller, and that the failing child had not failed, which he said in a way that told me he had been bracing to tell me the opposite. They were 11,000 people in spaces built for far fewer, breathing each other's warmth, watching their own breath, and somewhere above them in the black a thing was coming that they still, in their bones, could not believe was real. "Is it still inbound?" He asked me every hour on the hour. "Is the old ship still inbound?" "Still inbound," I said, "every hour on the hour. Closer, hold." At the 2-hour mark, the Fortitude began her deceleration burn, and the flare on my scan swelled and turned, the great old mass of her standing on its tail to shed 9,000 years of patient acceleration, and I knew that meant she was committing, that she had passed the point where she could have sailed by, where the physics still let her choose her own survival over the colonies, and that she had spent it without a word. She was going to arrive in their orbit slow enough to take them aboard. There is no version of that maneuver that leaves an old hull anything in reserve. Whatever the Fortitude had been hoarding across the long dark, she was burning it now, all of it, to stop at a rock full of strangers who had never called her. And then she was there. I did not see it. I want to be honest about that, because afterward people wanted me to have seen it, wanted me to describe the old scarred hull rising over the dome line into a hard alien noon, the running lights coming up over the horizon of a tide-locked world, The moment 11,000 people pressed against the viewports of two freezing domes and saw a ship that should not exist slide into their sky. I did not see it. I was 9 sectors away in a dead station, and all I had was a voice. But I had the voice. Tel Voss came on the line, and for a long moment he did not say anything at all. I heard, underneath his open carrier, a sound I did not recognize at first. A high, thin, rising noise, 11,000 voices in 2 sealed domes, and it took me a moment to understand that it was not screaming. It was the opposite of screaming. It was the noise a people make when the rope they could not afford to hope, it turns out, against everything, to be real. "It is here," Tel Voss said. His ledger voice was gone. "It is threshold, it is over us. It is huge, and it is old, and it is broken, and it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Its lights are lit. There is a voice. There is a voice coming down on our emergency band, human voice, it says." He stopped. The translator carried a breath. "It says, this is fortitude. We have you. Gather your people at the locks. We have you. We have you." After 9,000 years, after a patrol that outlived its empire, after a call she was never sent, that was what the old ship said when she rose over the dome line into the daylight. Not a speech, not a claim. 2 words a frightened species had built her to say, and then forgotten. She still knew how. "We have you." They took the colony off in 7 hours. It should not have been possible, and the inquiry would spend a long time establishing exactly how it was. But the short of it is that the Fortitude had been a warship of a paranoid age, and a paranoid age builds enormous locks and enormous holds, and the crew that worked them, the small waking watch, 90 centuries deep into their patrol, worked them the way men work who have had a very long time to think about the one thing they might someday be asked to do. They mated the great old lock to the colony's largest dome seal. They ran lines. They cycled people through in their hundreds, the failing and the elderly and the children first, exactly the order Tel Voss had been holding the air for, and they laid them in the vented cold berths the sleeping watch had given up. And they warmed them, and they counted them. I listened to the whole of it. I had no right to and no way to stop. Tel Voss kept the channel open and narrated his own rescue in a voice that broke and reformed and broke again, and I sat at my dead station 9 sectors away, and I logged it the way I had been hired to log silence, except it was not silence. It was the loudest thing the threshold line had carried in 9,000 years. The count, when it was done, was 11,009 every soul. Even the 2 elderly who had died in the cold. The Fortitude took their bodies too, because Tel Voss asked, and Fortitude Actual said, of course, the way you say of course to a thing that was never in question. And when the last of them was aboard, and the great lock sealed and the old ship turned her bow up and out of the gravity well, Tel Voss asked the only question he had left. "Where will you take us? We have no navy that will come. We have no world but the one you have just lifted us off. Where does a ship that does not exist take 11,000 people it was never sent for?" The answer came down on the emergency band in the flat, scraped voice that the whole colony could now hear, and Tel Voss relayed it to me word for word, because by then he understood that I was part of it, the watchman at the end of the deadline who had thumbed a key on a hunch. "Fortitude Actual to Vela, the old voice said. "We'll take you somewhere with air and a star. There's a hegemony charter post 40 hours coreward, your own people, the ones you called. We'll set you down where they can find you, and then we'll log the patrol." A pause. "It's been a long one." I had said they took the colony off in 7 hours, and that is the number the inquiry recorded, but 7 hours is a figure on a page and does not hold what the figure cost. Tel Voss narrated all of it. He never closed the channel. I think he could not bear to, I think after 9 days of being the only one who knew, he needed a witness for the part where the knowing finally paid out, and I was the witness he had. So I sat at my dead station 9 sectors away, and I heard a colony lifted off a dying world 1 lock cycle at a time, in a man's broken steady voice, and I will tell it the way he told it to me. The Fortitude did not park. She could not. The single coil would not let her hold a stable orbit. So she came in low and slow on a long flat pass, a kilometers-long hull of pitted ancient alloy sliding across the colony sky barely above the dome. Line close enough that Tel Voss said the running lights lit the ground like a second string of suns. She matched her motion to the planet's rotation and held herself there on the screaming, overworked coil, a thing that should have fallen out of the sky and did not. Because 40 people who had been doing impossible things for 9,000 years refused to let it. And she dropped her great lockdown toward the South Dome on cables, an enormous old boarding collar lowering out of the daylight, and the colony's engineers, Davrin Sewell's engineers, the careful man's own people, guided it down and mated it to the dome seal with their bare hands in the cold. Then the cycling began. The Fortitude's lock was built for a warship's traffic, hundreds at a pass, and the old crew ran it the way you run a thing you have rehearsed in your head for 90 centuries and never once gotten to do. They took the failing first, exactly as Tel Voss had rationed it. The elderly, the sick, the children, carried up through the collar in waves and laid in the vented cold berths the sleeping watch had given over. Till Voss said the berths were warm. He said his people had been so cold for so long that the first thing many of them did, laid into a human cold berth meant for a sleeping sentinel, was simply weep at the heat of it. The crew moved among them, 40 figures in old hard suits worn matte by time, saying nothing, counting everything, lifting the ones who could not lift themselves and laying them gently down and moving on to the next. They do not speak much, Tel Voss told me. Wonder in the exhaustion. They count, they lift, they count again. There is a woman of theirs, old, very old. Her face is threshold. I cannot tell you how old her face is. And she has carried my colony's children up through that collar in her own arms for 3 hours. And she has not stopped, and she has not spoken except to count them. She said 500 a while ago. I think she is counting the children. I think she is making sure of everyone. They lost no one in the cycling. That was the thing that should not have been possible and was. 11,000 people, a single overworked lock, a hull held in the sky on one failing coil, and the old crew threaded all of them up through the collar without losing a soul to the cold or the crush or the long fall. Because losing souls in a lock was a thing they had spent 9,000 years learning how to never do. The careful man, Davern Sewell, went up last of the able, after his children, after his neighbors, after every person he had spent 36 hours telling that the ship was a ghost. Tel Voss said that at the lip of the collar, Davern Sewell stopped and put his hand flat against the ancient pitted alloy of the hull, the way you touch a thing to be sure it is solid, and stood there a moment with his palm on 9,000 years of scarred metal, and then went up without a word. A careful man, making sure one last time, the ship was real. He had been wrong in the best way a man can be wrong. Tel Voss went up last of all. He would not leave his apron until every living soul was aboard and every dead one accounted for, and so he stood at the south lock in the killing cold and counted his people through the collar in the same ledger voice he had used for 9 days, and when the last of the living was up, he gathered the dead, the 2 elderly, the others the cold had taken in the waiting, and the child Imni, 4 years old, who had failed 3 hours short, and he saw them carried up himself, in his own arms where he could, because he would not have them lifted by a stranger's hands, even strangers as gentle as these. The old crew let him, they understood. A ship that did not keep 2 lifts understood a man who would not put his dead down. And then Villeneuve was empty. 11,009 souls lifted off a tide-locked rock into the hold of a ship older than their world, and the Fortitude drew up her great collar and lit her single coil and climbed, slow and heavy and trailing fire, up out of the gravity well she had no business escaping and into the hard daylight of orbit. Tel Voss said that as she rose, the whole colony, packed into her old holds and her vented berths, warm for the first time in 9 days, fell silent, and then began again to make the sound he had made when she first came over the dome line, the high, thin, rising noise that is not screaming, that is the noise a people make when the impossible thing has reached down and lifted them, and they are, against everything, alive. The old ship made for the charter post 40 hours coreward, the place where Tel Voss's own people could find them, the navy that was still 3 days out, the future the colony had nearly frozen to death waiting for. She did not chatter on the way. She had spent her margin. The crew was rationing the last of everything now, the air and the heat and the power, 11,000 strangers riding in a hull that had given up its sleeping berths to carry them. But once halfway through that long quiet run, Fortitude Actual came on my channel one last time, unprompted, and told me a thing I have never repeated to the inquiry and never will, because it was not theirs to file. The administrator asked me a while ago what we wanted, the old voice said, for doing this. He's been asking everyone. He can't stand owing a debt he can't pay. So I'll tell you what I told him, and you can decide what to do with it. A pause. I told him we don't want anything. I told him a watch isn't a debt. You don't bill a man for being close enough to hear him. Another pause, longer. But I'll tell you the truth, I didn't tell him. There is one thing. After 9,000 years of listening to nothing, of standing a watch for an enemy that never came, of waking 40 at a time to keep a lamp lit in a corridor with no end, after all of it, somebody finally needed us. Somebody finally called, even if they didn't mean to call us, even if they'd never heard our names, and we got to answer. That's the thing we wanted. That's the only pay there's ever been for this job. We got to be the ship that was close enough. The old voice was quiet a moment. 9,000 years, son, and we got to do the job exactly once. It was worth the wait. Tell the administrator that, if he ever asks you. Tell him it was worth the wait. The Fortitude set the colony down at the charter post 40 hours later, exactly as she had said, and then she did the thing the inquiry found hardest of all to forgive. She left. She did not wait to be thanked. She did not wait for the Navy. Still 2 days out and burning hard. She lowered her collar one last time onto the charter post's largest receiving lock, and she cycled 11,009 souls down into the care of their own kind, the living to the infirmaries and the warm halls, the dead to the cold rooms where their people could see to them properly. And when the last of them was off, when the hold that had carried a planet was empty again, the old ship drew up her collar and lit her single coil and stood away from the post, slow and patient and trailing the last of her fire, and turned her scarred bow back toward the deep she had come out of. Telvas told me about the leaving. He had gone up to the charter post observation gallery, exhausted past speech, and stood at the glass with what was left of his council, and with Davrin Sewell, the careful man, beside him, and watched the Fortitude climb away into the dark. There was no ceremony, there was no exchange of honors, no fleet review, no speech from the Navy that had not yet arrived. There was only an old broken hull with its running lights lit, dwindling against the stars, and 11,000 people pressed to every viewport the post had, watching the thing that had heard them go quietly back to the silence it had come from. She did not say goodbye, Telvas said. I thought she would. After all of it, I thought there would be something, a word. But the human on the channel, the one called Fortitude, he only said one thing as she pulled away. He said, Patrol concluded. Threshold. Relay our compliments. And then the channel closed and she was just a light, and then she was not even a light. A long pause across 9 sectors. 11,000 people watched her go and not one of them could thank her. She would not let us. She did not think we owed her anything. After what she spent, threshold. Do you understand what she spent? She did not think we owed her anything at all. I told him then the thing the old ship had asked me to tell him. I told him the thanks went the other way. I told him that any fool with a hull could come when called, and that the hard part, the cold, the 9 days, the careful man's reasonable disbelief, the lost child, the holding on with no reason left to hope, the hard part had been theirs, and that the Fortitude wanted him to know it. I told him a crew that had waited 9,000 years for a single call worth answering did not consider itself owed for getting to answer it. I told him it had been worth the wait. He was quiet for a very long time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in a way I cannot fully describe. It had the steadiness of a man who has been handed something he will carry for the rest of his life and has decided to carry it well. Then I will hold the line, Telvas said. That is what she would want, is it not? Not thanks, not a debt repaid. Just that we hold our own line after this for whoever needs us. That when some other colony aims its last cry at the wrong door, there is someone close enough, listening, willing to turn. She cannot have meant anything else. A thing like that does not save you so you can thank it. It saves you so you become the kind of people who would have done the same. A breath. We are going to build a listening post, threshold. The council has already voted it. Out on our frontier, facing the dark, we do not have a war fleet to throw across 9,000 years. But we can listen. We can be close enough for somebody. Someday, we learned that from a ghost. We learned it is the whole of the job. That is what became of Elenu. They rebuilt. The Navy came 2 days late and ferried them to a charter world with air and a star, exactly where the Fortitude had said they would end up, their own people, the ones they had called. They buried their dead, the child Imni among them, with the honors of a people who had been to the edge and been brought back. And then they built their listening post, facing the dark, and they keep a watch on it to this day, a colony that nearly froze waiting for help that should not have existed, now sitting at the end of its own deadline. Listening for the next call that bounces wrong, Telvas runs it. He could have had any post his people could offer, after what he held, and he chose the listening post on the frontier. He sends me a transmission now and then, down the long lanes, and we are 2 watchmen at 2 ends of the dark comparing the shape of the silence, and there is a thing he says at the close of every one of them, a thing his people have taken to saying when they begin a watch, and it is the nearest his language can come to the word they made for the old ship. We are already coming, he signs off. For whoever is out there. We are already coming. I think the Fortitude would have liked that. I think the captain 9,000 years dead in his berth 2 decks down would have liked it most of all. A colony at the wrong end of a bounced distress beam, lifted off a dying rock by a thing it never called and could never repay, deciding that the only way to carry the gift was to become the gift, to throw its own ears out into the dark and wait, ready, close enough, for the next wrong number that turns out to be the only call that matters. They found the colony 40 hours later, exactly where the Fortitude said she would set them down, 11,009 of them and 2 of those dead, waiting on the apron of a hegemony charter post that had never in its operating life expected to receive a single soul, let alone a planet's worth. The hegemony did what the hegemony does. It convened an inquiry. I know about the inquiry because they reached all the way out to the threshold station to take my statement, which is how I learned that my dead post had a comms address in some buried registry after all, and that a junior hegemony liaison officer had spent 3 weeks tracing a bounced beam backward through 9 sectors of refraction to a station that no current chart admitted existed. He was very polite. He was also, I think, a little afraid of me, in the way people get afraid of a thing they cannot file. He had a form with a field on it for the responding asset's flag and registry, and I gave him the Fortitude's designation, and he typed it in, and his system rejected it because the registry it belonged to had been closed 9,000 years before his empire's founding charter was drafted. This vessel, he said carefully, predates us. It predates almost everything, I said. That's rather the point. The part of the inquiry I would have given anything to witness. I only heard about secondhand from Tel Voss, who sent me a message months later down the same lanes my whisper had once crawled. By then he was a kind of folk authority among his people, the administrator who had aimed the call and held the line, and he had sat through every session of the inquiry because the inquiry was, in a sense, about a thing only he had really seen. The Hegemony Council could not understand it. That was the heart of his message. Not the rescue. Rescues happen. The Council could file a rescue. What they could not understand, what they turned over and over in session after session, was the routing. The colony had aimed a precise directional distress beam at a named naval anchorage. The beam had failed to reach that anchorage, and the help that had come instead had come from a direction the colony had never signaled, a species the colony had never contacted, an era the Council could not place on any timeline they owned. An elder of the Council, Tel Voss said his name was Councillor Reshadan, very old, very precise, a being who had spent a long life trusting that the galaxy ran on records, stood up at one session and said the thing the whole Council had been unable to say. We did not send for them, Reshadan said. I have read the colony's transmission log 40 times. There is no line in it that names them. There is no line in it that names Earth. There is no version of this signal sent by any hand at Villeneuve that was aimed at the thing that answered it. So I must ask the question that no one in this chamber wants to ask aloud. He looked, Tel Voss said, at the routing diagram projected over the council table. The colony's intended path drawn straight and clean toward the naval anchorage, and beside it the actual path, a crooked, broken thing bouncing off a dwarf planet and spreading into a cone that should have reached no one. How does a call that was sent to us, and only to us, get answered by something we never knew was listening? How does a species that does not appear in our records arrive before our own Navy even knows we are dying? The call was not theirs. They had no claim on it. They had no obligation to it. They had every right in the galaxy to log our distress and pass it on and let us freeze. And instead a dead ship spent the last of 9,000 years to reach a colony that had not called it. I do not have a category for that. I have been on this council for a very long time, and I do not have a single category for that. Tel Voss told me the chamber was quiet for a while after that. And then he said, an aide brought Reshadan the transcript of the only words the Fortitude had ever sent the colony. The hail that came down over the dome line that hard alien noon. The aide had it queued because the council had been trying fruitlessly to find some clause of intent in it, some hidden claim, some explanation. Reshadan read it. It was 4 lines. It was a species confirmation, and the dome layout query, and the order to gather at the locks, and then the 2 words the ship had said when she rose into the daylight. We have you. There is no claim in it, Reshadan said and set it down. There is no demand, there is no record of us in their books, and there is no record of them in ours. And the only thing they sent us, the only thing, was an instruction to stand where they could reach us. We have spent 6 weeks looking for the reason. There is no reason. There is only a ship that heard a call it was not sent and came. He was quiet a moment. I move that we close the inquiry. I find I have nothing left to find. They closed it. Tel Voss said the official record lists the responding asset as origin unknown, registry lapsed, intent presumed humanitarian, which is, he wrote to me, the closest a council of records will ever come to admitting that a thing happened which its records cannot hold. The Fortitude logged her patrol as she had said she would. I have the entry. The threshold station caught it on the way out. The last handshake down the dead line, a closing note from a hull at last allowed to write one. It did not say anything grand. It was a watchkeeper's entry, written by men and women who had stood a watch longer than any other crew in the history of anything, and it read the way such entries read. Patrol concluded. Tasking discharged. 11,009 recovered. 2 deceased recovered for return. Berths expended. Remaining watch will not be revived. Standing element stands down. It has been an honor to hold the line. That was all. No flourish. No claim. The oldest crew in the galaxy, woken from a watch that had outlived its own empire by a call meant for someone else, signed off the way watchmen do, by noting that the watch was over and that holding it had been worth the cost. I sit my post still. The amber light has gone dark again, and I do not expect to see it lit a second time. There is only one fortitude that I know of, and she has stood down. And the rest of the threshold pickets are presumably as cold and as lost as everyone reasonable always assumed they were. Maybe they are. Maybe one of them is still out there in the deep, lights lit, running silent, waiting for a call that will never be sent and will answer anyway. I log the silence either way. That is the post. That is the whole of the post. But I keep the laminated card in the drawer where I can reach it now. I have read it many times since that night. The part in the small letters at the bottom, the line nobody ever expected anyone to need. If lit, an asset of the standing patrol has acknowledged a tasking and is requesting routing. A young and frightened species put that line there 9,000 years ago, and then grew up and forgot it, and threw its sentinels out into the dark and forgot them too. They were sure by the end that no one was still listening. They were wrong. Somebody was always listening. And when a call came in off axis, smeared and bounced and meant for someone else entirely, the thing on the far end of the dead line did not check whether the call was its to answer. It just confirmed the routing, and it came.